The sun rises over a new age on Dianthos, where complex organisms can interact and prey on one another. Before, there were cells, films, and sludges of mass. Now, at the highest trophic levels, are creatures that can fend for themselves and develop organs at a rate of change unknown to the world before. Dianthos introduces higher organisms of each of the 5 great mother realms: Ectoderma, Priast, Torrid, Symbiogen, and Primitus. From the Ectoderman cymatocysts, there's the Symmochole. From the Ectoderman somatocysts, the Carirefouna and Telescopia. From the Priasts, Pyritidia as well as Fibropheria Chalakophorma. From the Torrids, the Scenpostoro, Injektiva, Anchopods, Constrictus, and Extrudiformes. From the Symbiogens, Fractalia and Turbuletts. And finally, from the Primitus, the Nanoslick. Nanoslick is a seemingly intelligent organism that is able to find sources of food and survive in hostile conditions. It is resistant to acidic and basic environments as well as extremely salty and distilled aquatic conditions. It may not roam the land, but with moisture, Nanoslick can survive for a decade on the smallest of morsels of food. It is most similar to slime molds of Earth. However, rather than expanding in that feet-first sort of method, it builds up static charge within its body and shoots roaming tendrils in a discharge pattern. Once a tendril is able to find a good foothold, it can form a satellite nucleus and build up material for a secondary expansion. This method of expansion leads to the success of the hardy organism. Fractalia is the first large-scale macrohabital organization on Dianthos, reaching up to a meter in height. This ability was unlocked by the nature of nature, where data compression is key. It is exponentially less taxing to store one set of instructions with an assignment to repeat at every junction, than to store a whole body plan inside of genes. Because Fractalia is an orchestra of Symbiogena, it may assign a member of its colony to act as a stem, another as a base to attach it to soil, and yet another group of members to undergo osmotic action and sieve nutrients from the water. A clade that is more difficult to explain are the Turbuletts. Sharing a common ancestor with the matted Laminids, the Turbuletts resemble a colony of symbiogens that had no other plan than to grow. Cheers to my cat for eating her dry food right now. The clade is unpredictable, displaying a wide variety of forms and roles. Though many colonies are short-lived, they can occasionally persist for hundreds of years, at times lying dormant for decades before the right conditions awaken them to explode in a fervor of reproduction. They can wipe out entire areas with aggressive land occupation, much like BlackRock does with American homes. The name Turbulett comes from their turbulent, chaotic forms as well as their mystifying behavior. They truly are the wild cards of this era. Of the Torrid mother realm, linked and knotted Torrids alike flourish into the New Age. By linking together into complex patterns, Fratatoroids form their first tissues. They connect into a mesh not unlike chainmail armor, where they can act on the environment around them, no longer destined to play the role as a passive bystander. With no sort of bony support, the meshes are flat, yet they contain volume. A seam along the body where the top and bottom connect hints at a radial form for future generations. Such is the life of an organism in the orchestra of Scenpostoro. Interestingly, one frequency of Scenpostoro has a rather complex biological makeup. The flagellotanza are a knotted torn colony forming one body. At the head, the torrens are compressed, whereas the central mass is made up of elongated torrens. At the tail, the flagellated torrens become hyperflagellated and provide power and motion for the organism. This advanced creature has 4 layers in the exoderm, epiderm, mesoderm, and gut. Alongside this clade, Fratatoroids evolved into another form of the Injektiva, with an elongated macrotorid emerging with brand new behaviors that separate it from its symphonic clade's origins. The injective mother develops thin membranous fins that wrap around the equator of the ring. When it is ready for reproduction, its daughters develop as nodules along the bare flesh and erupt while permanently connected to the mother. This can thin out a starved mother, and the children disconnect early, spelling doom for the family line. The children's main goal is to break free one way or another. If all goes well, the mother feeds her babies until she exhausts herself and breaks apart. In some motifs, the mother may stay intact and force the babies to disjoint to get away, before sewing together and floating away on their own. From the knotted ligitoroids come the Anchopods, Constrictus, and Extrudiformes. Anchopods are unique among torids for their specialized foot that anchors them to the sea floor. By relying on a twisting, jerking motion, they harpoon their body inches beneath the sand. This habit that deviates this clade from its relatives also solidifies them as a keystone species in their native waters. By disturbing the soil to a deeper level, they kick up nutrients for the bacterial mats that would otherwise have stayed deposited into the crust. Take a look at this cryotid and take note of the shape of the foot. Constrictus organisms also serve a vital purpose in the ecosystem by consuming larger unlucky prey. One member, known as the Lodi tristis, along with its cousin Lodi penctus, closes their large petals around anything that dares enter its radius of effectivity. By constricting this habitat, the lotus can squeeze life-sustaining compounds from their prey's body. Finally, Extrudiformes, though not the tallest habitat on the planet, gets its name from its nature as an extruded stalk with sticky protrusions around the oral face. This allows it the ability to not rely solely on filter feeding for its food. By absorbing larger pryists and even somatocysts, this organism makes their living. Examples of this clade include viscostomes and chastides. Among the lapis clade, a population splits off to seek a rarer and equally versatile material. Because of the higher levels of oxygen in the waters and atmosphere, iron in its ferric form has become ample in the environment. When the insoluble metal precipitates out from the water, it can form a thin layer along the sea floor, which builds up into banded rocks. Rocks of the sedimentary persuasion pervade the shallow waters, and their iron oxides diffuse into the area through erosion. In adapting from a silicon-rich to an iron-abundant habitat, Pyritidia develop frostrules of low-carbon iron, singling them out to their own branch of life. Deriving from the example provided by chromatoplastids that take on every color of visible light, the Calidoplasts further refine their strategy by manipulating only the most efficient electromagnetic wavelengths. This clade holds a monopoly on red, yellow, and orange pigments and become the primary producers of the planet for many cycles to come. By absorbing blue, green, and purple light, these plastids take energy from the sun's safest wavelengths. Viridioplasts, by entering the unexplored niche of a green producer, produce descendants that retain their coloration and start to modify their body plans to take on harder to reach areas, introducing Fibropheria Chalakophorma. No longer based on single cellular habits, these organisms become one with their environment. Chalakophorma is the designation for colonial viridioplastic mats that can hover on the surface, kept together as one being by the surface tension of the water. Fibropheria, on the other hand, consists of habitats that root themselves in the crevices of pebbles and oxygenate the small pools in which they live. The strategy depicted vibes with jagged coasts which offer protection and a cozy eeping arrangement. Revisiting the cymatocysts leads us to the development of powered movement. In manipulating their descendants' morphology, the cymatocysts have been able to morph into hollow shells with a graduated slope around its edges. While still small, less than 3 centimeters, the Symmochole unlocked a newfound freedom of the water. More specifically, I'm referring to an ensemble of the clade known as conicles. This clade continues on to produce the flitterpuff, a gelatinous monstrosity that learned to manipulate feather-like extensions to produce thrust. The signature cymatic twitch is used here, but not to the degree of a snap, more of a fluid motion. With generations gone by, cymatocysts can truly flex their creative strategies. Remember that the cymatocysts' main shtick is their several organized coelms. What I left out is that the vesicular cymatocysts become their own orchestra of vesicula. Vesicula splits into a number of varied clades, including the Trivesica, Duovesica, and Indesica. Included in the ensemble of Trivesica is Methanopsia. Somewhat resembling a balloon, this organism derives from an advanced population of methane-producing bacteria. Its thin but strong membranes trap gas inside the body at a high pressure with stabilizing fluid. It respires via osmosis and excretes waste with ion pumps interwoven into the stalks between each membrane. The Duovesica ensemble gives rise to the short-lived octodecamer organisms who found stability in the form of an 18-part repeating pattern. However, it was unable to keep with competition and fell extinct within a short 40,000 years. Also from this group arises the Duodenostemma, a filter-feeding species with 2 encephalized appendages. All even-headed vesicula belong to the Duovesic ensemble. Indesic organisms have formed a symbiotic relationship with enteroplastids so that their fatty bodies can support large stores of nutrients while avoiding desiccation from the sun on shallow coasts and tide pools. In some populations, the fatty exterior supports the organism by letting in sunlight. They merge again with chromatoplastids, which can feed on sunlight without being exposed. Thus, these organisms develop proteins that block UV light, tinting the jelly ball during the hottest parts of the long day. From Vesicula, you get motifs such as the Idurapoda, surface feet, and Heptapoda, with 5 feet connecting it stably to the ground. In following with the Vesicula, you might also come across the Stadia, whose name comes from the shape in a member of which, the throschal, contains a one-opening gut. When you instead nest those structural gaps inside of one another, you get the lamellar somatocysts, which form the orchestra of Lamella. From Lamella, you can expand this body plan either perpendicular or parallel with gravity. If you follow the path of creatures that span wide, you can find the Carirefouna ensemble. These started as structural bacterial mats which grew wrinkles and became permanent. They modified their oral surface, facing away from the rocks, gaping wide to accept nutrients from marine snow. Creatures of the Carirefouna clade exploit the wrinkle effect to fully make use of their surface area. The members of the clade are called fauna, which will in time grow massive with huge internal volumes. Also in this orchestra exists the Frothophore motif. While some bacterial mats solidified with wrinkles, this type created bubbles of foam that solidified into shape. When encountering organic material on the seafloor, these creatures become a mass of frothy foam that dissolves and exgests its food. Duplicofronsia is a frequency of organism in the Lamella orchestra. Though it is without coelom, it is classified as a pseudocoelomate, with a fluid-filled body layer separating the skin from internal tissue. In the embryonic stage, its nucleus major engulfs the nucleus minor and develops its layers. In healthy times, it will reproduce by fractalization of the nucleus major, and in hard times it may invert, exposing the nucleus minor, which then hardens, while on the inside, the nucleus major dissolves the body into goo to form many gametocysts. The ensemble that expands along the force of gravity is called Telescopia because of their telescopic body parts. This is where you can find the very first worms. The first worms are part of the Ambuloceolus motif, no relation to the deer-whale organisms on Earth. From the Ambuloceolus come populations of a creature called Wavelets. They are flat, worm-like creatures that have developed a strategy of locomotion called ragiform swimming by undulating both sides of its bilateral body. Given evolutionary time, their bodies become more hydrodynamic to reflect the shape of a plane's wing. Even further along in time, they will develop a proboscis to extend their range for inches past the top of their body. These worms were so successful in their burrowing niche that they gave rise to some of the most powerful creatures of the times in the Dura Diskus. It is named solely after its responsibility as the common ancestor of the Dura clade and the Diskus clade, which are ensembles of Telescopia. The Dura are worm-like creatures with one patch of hardened skin. There are 3 main types of Dura, where the hard patch is migrated coronally, orally, or interiorly. Note that Wavelets are not Dura, as they will never develop the hard patch. Diskus organisms are similar to the Carirefouna, thanks to convergent evolution. However, as its pedigree and higher mobility, these creatures will have a very different evolutionary trajectory. A secretion of adhesive junk erupts from the aboral side to tightly bind them to the rocks, while their discs face skyward to collect organic sediments. Hailing from communicant classification, the Ectoprona dance among the seas as the first creatures to gain free motility. They cannot choose how to move, for the Ectoprona is made up of many small disconnected bodies working together as one. A randomized calculation based on the amount of light and concentrations of certain minerals in the water force its movement. Ectoprona organisms have members that incorporate a few different bodily systems. On Earth, the siphonophore member is called a zooid. Here we can refer to them as vivids. Motile vivids help the organism to move around with long flagella by stirring the water. Floteals are gas-filled vivids that provide orientation for the body. Gastroteals are the stomach of the organism. Food is captured by the gastroteals and in the motile's collar, then is passed through a chain of lipins to distribute the products. Ballasteals make up for the anchor for the colony and orient against the floteals. Gonoteals are capable of creating identical genetic copies that leak out of the tentacle-like tubes below. This frequency of Ectoprona is quite advanced for its time.